On April 23, 1967, at 3:35 ante meridiem, a rocket was launched amidst the cold winds blowing at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. It was piercing the sky with a loud roar heading upwards. This was the Soviet Union's Soyuz 1 spacecraft carrying its sole passenger cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov heading towards the sky. This mission was about to make history. For the first time, two Soviet spacecraft, Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 2, were going to dock together in space. But as soon as the spacecraft reached Earth's orbit, the faces of the scientists at mission control turned pale. Wrinkles of tension started to appear on their foreheads. One of the spacecraft's solar panels was not opening and the power of the craft was decreasing. And Komarov's voice, which was echoing on the radio, also had a strange restlessness in it. Was this mission really going to make history, or was it about to become a tragedy whose truth would be hidden from the world? This is the story of Soyuz 1, the first human death in the history of space exploration. This is the story of Vladimir Komarov, who lost his life, and of a mission that was in danger even before it began. Let's explore every aspect of this mysterious tragedy, the Soviet space race and Soyuz. It was the 1960s, a time when the two superpowers of the world were competing to prove themselves better and stronger. Because of this, there was a Cold War going on between these two countries, and these two countries were America and the Soviet Union. This Cold War was not only being fought on the ground but also in space, which was specifically called the space race. Yes, in 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the whole world by launching Sputnik 1, and then in 1961, Yuri Gagarin made history by flying in Vostok 1. He became the first human to go into space, but America was not far behind either. Their Apollo program was progressing rapidly, and the Soviet Union had to do something big to maintain its lead here. It was under this pressure that the Soyuz program was born. The Soyuz spacecraft was designed. For the future, this was a spacecraft that could not only operate in Earth's orbit, but it was also fully prepared for a journey to the moon. Its purpose was to join two spacecraft together in space, which we now call docking, so that astronauts could be transferred from one spacecraft to another. This technique was essential for the moon mission, but there was very little understanding of it. The Soviet leadership, especially Leonid Brezhnev, wanted something to happen on the 50th anniversary of the 1917 Soviet Revolution that would once again shock the world. The Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 2 missions were prepared in this haste. The plan was that Soyuz 1 with Vladimir Komarov alone on board would be launched first. Then 24 hours later, the Soyuz 2 mission would be launched, in which there would be two cosmonauts, Valery Bykovsky and Yevgeny Krunov. These two spacecraft would meet in space, dock, and one cosmonaut would move from Soyuz 2 to Soyuz 1. This mission was meant to prove the marvel of Soviet engineering. But the truth was that the Soyuz spacecraft was not fully ready. During testing, several technical glitches had come up and the engineers hadn't. They had also warned that the spacecraft was not safe to go into outer space. Vladimir Komarov, a hero's sacrifice. For this mission, one name comes up again, Vladimir Komarov. A name that still echoes in the history of space today. Born in Moscow in 1927, Komarov was an experienced test pilot. In 1964, he participated in the Voskhod 1 mission, which was the first Soviet mission of its kind. In this mission, more than one cosmonaut went into space. Komarov was not only skilled, but his leadership and courage are considered exemplary. But there were some questions behind his appointment for Soyuz 1. It is said that Komarov already knew about the flaws in the spacecraft. Problems kept coming up repeatedly during testing. Engineers had warned that the mission could be dangerous, but there was so much political pressure on the Soviet leadership that cancelling the mission was not possible. Komarov's friend and backup cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin inspected the spacecraft and raised questions about its readiness. Some stories say that Gagarin did not. He had tried to stop the mission, but Komarov had taken this responsibility upon his own shoulders. Did he know that this mission could cost him his life? Or was it the pressure of the Soviet system that forced him to do so? On April 23, 1967, Komarov sat in that spacecraft at Baikonur Cosmodrome, which many engineers had doubts about. Were they heroes ready to sacrifice for their country, or were they victims of a system who were ready to pay any price for their achievements? Soyuz launch and the initial crisis. On the night of April 23, 1967, the countdown began at Baikonur Cosmodrome. The rocket engines roared and Soyuz 1 moved towards Earth's orbit. In the beginning, everything seemed fine. Komarov contacted Mission Control. His voice was confident, but as soon as the spacecraft entered orbit, the first problem appeared. One of Soyuz 1's 2 solar panels was not opening. These solar panels were essential for charging the spacecraft's battery. Without them, the spacecraft's power was rapidly decreasing. Mission Control told Komarov to try to fix the solar panels himself. But this wasn't possible in space. Besides this, the spacecraft's orientation control system was also not working. Komarov had to manually control the spacecraft to stabilize it, which was extremely difficult and exhausting. The tension was also increasing in Mission Control. Many people wondered whether Komarov should be called back, but the Soviet leadership ordered the mission to continue. The next day, Soyuz 2 was scheduled to launch. If Soyuz 1 returned, it would be considered a defeat for the Soviet Union. Komarov also did not lose courage. He told Mission Control that he would keep trying, but this time there was a slight frustration in his voice. So did he already know that this mission could be his last, the end of the mission? Komarov's condition was getting worse and worse in Earth's orbit. The failure of the solar panels had cut the spacecraft's power in half. The malfunction of the orientation control system had made it almost impossible to control the spacecraft. Komarov had to manually control the spacecraft repeatedly, which was also draining his energy. Mission Control finally decided that this mission would have to be aborted. The launch of Soyuz 2 was also cancelled and Komarov was ordered to return to Earth. On the morning of April 24, 1967, Komarov began the re-entry process. This is the most dangerous part of space travel. The spacecraft has to enter Earth's atmosphere at the correct angle. If the angle was wrong, the spacecraft could burn up or get lost in space. Komarov used his experience to try to bring the spacecraft in the right direction. Even at Mission Control, everyone was holding their breath. After re-entry began, the spacecraft had entered the atmosphere and the heat was so intense that the outer layer of the spacecraft was glowing. But then, in the final moments, the most terrifying incident occurred. The parachute system of Soyuz 1 failed. The drogue parachute did deploy, but it couldn't pull out the main parachute. Excessive heat and pressure had affected the parachute compartment so much that the lines got tangled. The backup parachute also got tangled along with the drogue. Without a parachute, the spacecraft became uncontrollable and started falling towards Earth at a very high speed. Tragedy and its impact. It was the afternoon of April 24, 1967. In Russia's Orenburg Oblast, near the village of Karabutak, there was a loud explosion. The Soyuz 1 spacecraft crashed into the ground. The impact was so strong that the spacecraft was completely destroyed. They were badly injured, but they could still be identified. The Soviet authorities immediately sealed off the entire area. The world was told that Komarov died due to a parachute failure. But the technical issues that occurred during the entire mission, the Soviet Union very cleverly did not make them public. The Soyuz 1 tragedy dealt a severe blow to the Soviet space program. Due to the mission failure, the Soyuz program was suspended for 18 months. During the investigation, it was found that the spacecraft had several design and testing issues. Due to the failure of the parachute system, the drogue parachute malfunctioned and heat built up in the compartment. But this tragedy also taught some lessons. Soviet engineers redesigned the Soyuz spacecraft. Safety protocols were made even stricter. This tragedy was one of the biggest early incidents to highlight the dangers of space exploration, mystery and questions. Many questions still remain around the Soyuz 1 tragedy. Did Komarov fully know about the flaws in the mission? Did the Soviet leadership ignore the engineers' warnings? Some people believe that this tragedy was the result of the Cold War space race, where national pride mattered more than human life. Another question for which no one has an answer to this day. Could this incident have been prevented? If Soviet leadership had given the mission more time, could Komarov's life have been saved? Komarov's professionalism was clearly reflected in his final communication. He kept trying to control the spacecraft until the very last moment, but his efforts were always unsuccessful. Vladimir Komarov's death made him a hero. The Soviet Union awarded him the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, and a memorial was built in his honor in Moscow. But his greatest legacy is the lesson that his death taught all of humanity about space exploration. Thanks to this, today the Soviet program has continued to send cosmonauts and astronauts to the International Space Station. It is based on the same design that was improved after Komarov's death. Komarov's story is one of courage, sacrifice, and the risks that come with space exploration. They remind us that behind every successful mission are the stories of those who lost their lives. The tragedy of Soyuz 1 was not just an accident, it was a warning, a reminder that as thrilling as space exploration is, it is equally dangerous. Vladimir Komarov's death added a new chapter to the history of space, a chapter that tells the story of courage, sacrifice, and humanity's curiosity. So the next time you look at the night sky and gaze at the countless stars, take a moment to remember Vladimir Komarov among those stars. A man who went into the infinity of space and never returned. On the morning of June 30, 1971, the sound of a helicopter echoed across the vast and desolate plains of Kazakhstan. The Soviet Union's Soyuz 11 spacecraft had landed on Earth. Dust was swirling all around, and the rays of the sun were falling on that small capsule which had just returned from the infinite depths of space. There was an atmosphere of excitement all around and a glow of hope on the faces of the recovery team members. This was the moment that Soviet scientists, engineers, and the entire country had been eagerly waiting for. The Soyuz 11 mission was the first in the world to give humans the opportunity to stay on a space station for an extended period. It turned into terror. The scene before them sent chills down everyone's spine. A horrifying image appeared before everyone. It shook not only everyone present there that day to their core, but it also added a dark chapter to the history of space. As soon as the hatch opened, the three astronauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev, were found lying in their seats, but this was no ordinary sight. Blood was oozing from their eyes as if some terrible pressure had ruptured their veins. Blue and black spots had appeared on their faces, and thin streams of blood were flowing from their noses and ears. The blood had dried on their uniforms. Their eyes were open. It seemed as if they had witnessed something terrifying, and what could be more frightening than seeing your own death right in front of you? But there was no movement in them. Dobrovolsky was in such a position as if he still wanted to say something, but his breath had already stopped. Volkov's head was tilted to one side, and Patsayev's hand was still reaching toward that valve, which perhaps he was trying to close until his last breath. The hands of the recovery team members were trembling. He tried to scream, but his throat was choked from inside. The people they had come to see alive and smiling were now faced with a reality they had never even imagined. The team's doctors immediately tried to check their pulse, but within seconds it became clear that all three were no longer in this world. This was the first and so far the only incident in space where astronauts lost their lives in the cold and silent depths of space. Soyuz 11. What was about to become a historic victory for the Soviet Union turned into a tragedy that shook the entire world. These three astronauts had spent 23 days in space while working on the world's first space station, Salyut 1. Preparations for celebrations were underway throughout the Soviet Union for their return, but now that celebration had turned into deep mourning. What exactly happened that this mission, which was about to make history, ended up becoming a stain on history itself? This incident raised many questions. Where exactly did things go wrong? Was this mission in danger from the very beginning? And the biggest question of all, could this tragedy have been prevented? Today we will examine this story from every angle and try to find out exactly where the mistake was, from the beginning of that mission to its tragic end.
Till the very end, so let's start this terrifying story right from the beginning.
Let's see, I'm above Yarlov. I'm feeling really good. The story of Soyuz 11 begins on June 6, 1971. When this spacecraft was launched from the Soviet Union's Baikonur Cosmodrome, the space race was at its peak. America had taken its first step on the moon in 1969 through Apollo 11. And those famous words of Neil Armstrong, "A small step for a man, but a giant leap for mankind," was echoing throughout the world. The Soviet Union did not want to forget this defeat, and its answer to it was Salyut 1. The world's first space station. It was a dream that could fulfill the hope of humans living in space for a long time. Salyut 1 was launched on April 19, 1971, but it was sent for this purpose. The first mission, Soyuz 10, failed to dock with it. Due to a technical malfunction, the crew could not enter the station at all. All hopes were pinned on Soyuz 11. 3 astronauts were selected for this mission. Georgy Dobrovolsky was a 43-year-old inexperienced Air Force pilot. He was also the commander of this mission. He was a calm and serious person who loved his family very much. He often used to write letters to his wife and 2 daughters. Vladislav Volkov was a 35-year-old energetic and experienced astronaut who had gone on Soyuz 7 in 1969. He was known for his humorous and friendly nature. And Viktor Partsahev, a 38-year-old talented engineer for whom this was the first space mission. He was passionate about experiments and dreamed of seeing the Earth from space. But these 3 were never actually on the main team. The real team was supposed to go for the Soyuz 11 mission. He was Alexei Leonov, the astronaut who performed the first spacewalk in space. Valery Bykovsky and Pyotr Kolodin. But just 4 days before the launch, a small spot appeared in Kubasov's lungs. The doctors thought it could be tuberculosis. Due to the strict rules of the Soviets, the entire team was replaced and the backup crew got the chance to do this mission. But later, it was found that Kubasov didn't have tuberculosis. It was just a minor allergy. After the incident, Leonov said, "I still feel that if we had gone, maybe this accident would not have happened." On the day of the launch, Soyuz 11 soared towards space with a loud roar. The next day, on June 7, it successfully docked with Salyut 1. This was a historic moment. For the first time, humans were about to live on a space station. For the next 22 days, all 3 of them conducted many experiments there. They studied the sun and stars, observed the effects of zero gravity on plants, and also recorded the effects of space on their own bodies. Their live broadcasts were being watched continuously on Soviet television. On June 19, Partsayev also celebrated his birthday in space. He ate cake from a small tube and joked with his companions, but there were also some troubles amid these happy moments. There was a small fire on the station which caused smoke to spread throughout the station. The crew managed to control it, but the air quality on the space station had deteriorated. Mission Control decided that it was time to return. On June 29, they separated from Salyut 1. They packed their belongings into Soyuz, scientific data samples, and some personal items. Dobrovolsky looked at the Earth from the space station window for the last time and said, "This blue sphere is so beautiful." And then the hatch closed and they were slowly heading towards Earth. Everything was normal in their last conversation with Mission Control. Dobrovolsky said, "We're ready, re-entry is starting." After that, the radio went silent, which was completely normal at the time, but no one knew that the voices would be quiet forever. The accident and horrible discovery. Now we reach the moment when Soyuz 11 returned to Earth. It's the morning of June 30, 1971, 6:46 ante meridium. The spacecraft had made a perfect landing 90 kilometers southwest of Karajal, Kazakhstan. Both parachutes, first the drogue and then the main parachute, had deployed at the right time. The speed of the space capsule slowed down and it landed gently on the ground. Everything looked normal from the outside. The recovery team quickly reached the capsule. As they got off the helicopter, they had wireless radios and were giving every update to Mission Control. There were smiles on the faces of the team. They were ready to welcome their heroes. But as soon as they knocked on the hatch, they got no response. There was a strange silence. The team leader looked at his companions and said, "Maybe they're tired." But there was a strange restlessness in his mind as well. He started the process of opening the hatch. The Soyuz hatch was heavy and it took a few minutes to open it, but as soon as it opened, nothing inside was normal. That horrifying scene was in front of everyone. All three astronauts were in their seats, but seeing their condition, the recovery team was shocked. Georgy Dobrovolsky's head was slightly bent forward. Drops of blood were dripping from his eyes. There were blue and black spots on his face. It seemed as if his skin had shriveled due to lack of oxygen. Vladislav Volkov's head was hanging to one side. A thin line of blood was flowing from his nose, which had dried up after reaching his chin. Viktor Patsayev's condition was different from the others. One of his hands was reaching toward the ventilation valve, which was right next to him. His fingers were bent in that direction as if reaching for it with his last breath. He was trying to close it. Blood was coming out of his ears and his face had turned blue. One of the recovery team members later wrote, "It's hard to put that moment into words. His eyes were open, but there was no life left in them. It seemed like he wanted to say something to us." The doctors immediately They tried to check his pulse. Dobrovolsky's body was still slightly warm. Perhaps he had died just a few minutes earlier. The team did not start cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Not a single soldier pressed on Dobrovolsky's chest. Another was trying to shake Volkov, but after 10 minutes, everyone gave up. The entire team had fallen prey to death. What exactly had happened? The investigation into Soyuz 11 began. The Soyuz has three parts: the orbital module, the descent module, and the service module. Before re-entry on June 29 at 11:35 post-meridium, these parts separated from each other. And during that time, a ventilation valve was accidentally left open. This valve was 13 millimeters in size and its purpose was to balance the pressure after landing. But it had opened in space before the scheduled time. Because of this, the oxygen of the descent module leaked out into the vacuum of space and the pressure inside the space capsule dropped to zero. The astronauts did not have pressure suits. While designing Soyuz, the space suits were removed to save space. A human cannot survive in a vacuum for long. Within the first 15 seconds, a person becomes unconscious. The air left in his lungs started expanding rapidly. His blood vessels burst, blood clotted in his brain, and due to lack of oxygen, he became unconscious. The autopsy revealed that blood had clotted in his lungs and his eardrums had ruptured. Patsayev's body was found near the valve. There were marks on his hand indicating that he was trying to close it. But it takes more than 60 seconds to manually close the valve and he only had 15 seconds. Another shocking thing came up during the investigation. Mission Control had heard a strange noise before re-entry. a loud hissing sound, but at that time, it wasn't taken very seriously. Later, it was found out that this was the sound of the valve opening. The main team's commander, Alexei Leonov, said that during training, he had warned that the valve should be checked manually, but the crew relied more on the automatic system. Leonov later tested that it took about 52 seconds to close the valve. It was a small technical mistake, but it cost 3 lives. The Soviet government initially tried hard to hide it, but the official statement of the Soviet Union was released. The mission was successful, but after landing, there was a medical emergency. But the truth couldn't stay hidden for long. Impact and lessons of the tragedy. The loss of Soyuz 11 shook the Soviet space program to its core. The death of 3 astronauts.
It was not just a technical failure, it was a national tragedy.
Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsev were heroes of the Soviet Union. They were honored with the title of Heroes of the Soviet Union. For their families, this news was nothing less than a nightmare. When Dobrovolsky's wife, Lyudmila, was given this news, she held her children close to her chest and cried for hours. Volkov's son later said, "My father always used to say that he would touch the stars and return, but he never came back." Patsayev's wife, Vera, who was herself a scientist, tried to complete his unfinished experiments. On July 3, 1971, his funeral was held in Moscow with state honors. His ashes were placed in the Kremlin wall, and that day thousands of people were on the streets. That day, the Soviet Union also invited American astronaut Tom Stafford to join in mourning. This was a rare moment of unity during the Cold War. But along with this mourning, questions were also being raised. Was this sacrifice worth it? And is this the end of the Soviet Union space program? After the accident, the Soviet government did not conduct any manned missions for 2 years. This was a time for investigation and improvement. The engineers redesigned Soyuz. The biggest change was the introduction of pressure suits. Earlier, to make space for 3 people, the suits had been removed. Now the crew size was reduced to 2, so that every astronaut could wear a suit. The ventilation valve was also improved. It was changed from automatic to manual control, and an extra security lock was added. In 1973, Soyuz 12 tested this new design. The mission was successful, and the astronauts wore suits during re-entry. This was a lesson learned. Safety can never be taken lightly. The impact of this tragedy was not limited to the Soviet Union. National Aeronautics and Space Administration also took it seriously. Apollo 15. New rules were added to the Apollo 15 mission, which was scheduled to launch just a few weeks later. It was made compulsory for astronauts to wear pressure suits during re-entry. A National Aeronautics and Space Administration engineer said, "Soyuz 11 reminded us that even the smallest mistake in space can cost lives." Jihadsa showed that dark side of space travel which cannot be ignored, but it also made the future safer. After Soyuz 11, the Salyut program was restarted. A lot of improvements were made in Salyut 2 and Salyut 3, and later the Mir space station came. Today's International Space Station also stands on this very foundation. Dobrovolsky, Volkov, and Patsayev gave their lives to make the dream of the space station a reality. In their memory, the Soviet Union gave many honors. There are 3 craters on the moon named after them: Dobrovolsky crater, Volkov crater, and Patsayev crater. Their memorials were built in Kazakhstan. Their names will always be recorded in the history of space. But this accident also raised a profound question. Is space exploration worth it? Every mission carries risks. The Apollo 1 fire in 1967, the Challenger explosion in 1986, and the Columbia disaster in 2003. It reminds us that reaching space is not easy. But still, every accident makes us better than before. Soyuz 11 changed not only the technical improvements but also the training of astronauts. Today, every astronaut is fully prepared for any emergency situation. They are taught everything from practicing breathing in a vacuum to manual control. The story of Soyuz 11 began with that terrifying moment when the valve was accidentally left open and ended with that dreadful moment when the recovery teams found those 3 astronauts lifeless in that space capsule. But this was a harsh reality of space. But still, this story is not just about sorrow, it's a story of courage, sacrifice, and learning. Where Soyuz 11 failed, it paved a new path for the future. This incident forced the Soviet Union and the whole world to rethink the safety of space travel. Pressure suits, better design, and strict regulations, all of these are the result of that tragic incident. Today, when we look at the International Space Station, where astronauts live for months, we should remember that missions like Soyuz 11 are the foundation, built with blood and sweat. Every astronaut who reaches for the stars today is indebted to their sacrifices. Their story teaches us that instead of fearing failure, we should learn from it. This journey into space will never end. There are dangers at every step, but every danger takes us forward. The heroes of Soyuz 11 showed us that path in their memory. We should understand that behind every success, there are some great sacrifices hidden. It is said that the space race began in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik 1. Sputnik 1 was the first successful satellite in human history, and it was between 2 superpowers. This era of proving themselves superior in the field of space and dominating the world with their ideology is called the Cold War or the space race. But hardly anyone knows how many astronauts died in obscurity for this name. There was a Cold War going on between them. These 2 superpowers were America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which is mainly Russia today. There are some other countries that broke away from it, but the main ideology is still Russia. Both these countries, sometimes in the name of patriotism and sometimes out of the desire to stay ahead of their so-called enemy nation, sent even ordinary people and even innocent animals into space. The point here is not that they did it as an experiment, sent all of them into space. But the problem is that none of them had any plan to bring them back. All those who went into space, they went on a one-way trip. In this sequence, the first is a female dog named Laika, who was the first astronaut and died in space. Her story is very tragic. She did pioneer the space race. Scientists learned a lot in space science from her death, but what happened to her on humanitarian grounds was not right. This is just one case. Who knows how many such cases are buried in the history of the space race? If they are brought to light, humanity itself might be ashamed. This is a history where there was no direct confrontation. No country even attacked another country. But at that time, the governments of their own countries took the lives of their own people. Actually, this history is filled with such stories, with the corpses of such nameless people. In 1957, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics launched Sputnik 1, the first satellite in human history, and with this, the Cold War had begun. Exactly 4 years after this. In 1961, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, that is, the Soviet Union, launched Yuri Gagarin into space and established its dominance in the world. Because Yuri Gagarin had become the first person to go into space, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics had a communist ideology, while in contrast, America had a capitalist ideology. Now, after all this happened, America started to feel panic. It started to feel that if the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics kept staying in the spotlight like this, its ideology, that is, communism, would start to dominate. On the other hand, America was sitting empty-handed, meaning it hadn't achieved any major success. But the Soviet Union had made history by launching its first cosmonaut into space. But hardly anyone knew that there were many dark secrets hidden behind the Soviet Union's program. Before Yuri Gagarin went into space, in 1960, a Soviet Union rocket was standing on the launch pad ready for takeoff, but as soon as it was ignited, 78 members of the ground crew standing near the launch pad were burned to ashes right there. But not many people know about this nowadays. In 1961, just before Yuri Gagarin's flight, a Soviet cosmonaut also died, burned to ashes. Because the oxygen tank in the training capsule caught fire. In 1966, a similar accident happened when Yuri Gagarin's closest friend Vladimir Komarov died. During the Soyuz 1 mission, this accident happened while returning to Earth because the parachute failed to deploy. Moreover, it is also said that Yuri Gagarin had a feeling that something could go wrong in this mission. But at that time, it was probably more important for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics to stay ahead in the Cold War. There are also rumors that hundreds of structural problems in this mission were identified even before the flight. But the higher authorities didn't listen to the engineers at all. Maybe they must have thought, after all, it's just a test. Let's see, it's just one life after all. If it succeeds, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics will have dominance. These are some stories that are documented, but they are rarely discussed. But it is said that the history of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is quite vast. It is possible that because of such incidents, there are similar corpses floating in the orbit of our Earth, and those too from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, cosmonauts. This is a claim that's quite hard to believe because there's no official record of it anywhere. But if you look for evidence, you can find it. As you keep searching, you find more and more links and they come before us. A story, the story of a woman that will give you goosebumps. This isn't a ghost story. But it's possible that if you're watching this video at night, you might get scared too, because this is the story of a woman who is left alone in space. Just thinking about dying is scary. From a confined space in the capsule, that woman is continuously moving away from Earth and she is screaming. Now you know why, because her capsule had caught fire. She was about to burn, and in this situation, she was calling Russian ground control for help. Actually, the layers of this story begin to unfold. The year was 19. Along with that, when a science fiction writer, Robert Heinlein, travels in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and talks to a Red Army cadet. He tells him that recently, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics has not launched any manned mission from here. The interesting thing to note here is that this incident happened before Yuri Gagarin went into space. That launch was of the Korbel Sputnik 1 mission, and it is said that there was some mechanical failure in it. Because of that, the spacecraft started going in the wrong direction. Because of that, it was impossible to bring the capsule back, so it was just left in space like that. Meanwhile, Soviet officials say that the spacecraft launch was an unmanned test flight, but according to Heinlein, there was a cosmonaut in that capsule. Then this story connects to two amateur Italian radio operators who, during their investigation, it is said that they captured a signal which they claimed that these were panic signals from the lost USSR space capsule. They were two amateur radio operators, Ashley and Giovanni. For Jordi and Cardi, these two were brothers, and they didn't mention that they had been working on 1957, and what they found during this time was shocking. They said that Yuri Gagarin was not the first astronaut. In fact, according to these two brothers, in November 19, along with this, they captured a transmission which was in Morse code. It was coming from a Soviet spacecraft. They found out which spacecraft the signal was coming from. It was not orbiting the Earth, but rather it was moving away from the Earth, which meant that the SOS transmission was generally a call for help. But why would an empty spacecraft ask anyone for help? Surely there must have been some cosmonaut present in that space capsule. This conclusion was truly spine-chilling. That cosmonaut was moving away from Earth completely alone. Even thinking about it is scary. What must have been going through his mind at that time? He collected many such recordings, and finally, in one recording, he heard a woman's voice. She was speaking in Russian.
She was saying that she was about to die. She was a fire.
The flames. And she was screaming for help from mission control. Here is that same audio in front of you, Ponapile mo. It's hard, Ponapilele. Now, after listening to this, you must have gotten goosebumps too. There was only fear in his voice because there was almost no hope left. We're not saying that this incident is completely real, but what if this recording is real? This means that there was a woman who was the first to go into space and she remained there forever. The Soviet Union completely denied any such allegations. After all, why would they accept it? There's nothing strange about someone dying in space. And this also happened during a time when all this information was kept very secret. Even if this really did happen, it will still remain a conspiracy for the whole world. Because there are some secrets that never come out. Who knows how many such unknown people there must be whose lives just faded away into the dust like this. Anyway friends, how did you like this information?